And while more people are joining and greeting each other in the chat, I think it's time to officially start that. So once again, welcome to this online launch. And once again, the note that this event will take place in English, but is simultaneously interpreted into Spanish and French. So if you would prefer to follow the launch in either French or Spanish, please click on interpretation in the meeting controls at the bottom of your Zoom window, and then select the language channel of your preference. You may find further instructions in the chat, also in French and Spanish. So welcome everyone. My name is Marina Dürker. I am the LWF Program Executive for Diaconia and Development. I work in the LWF Department for Theology, Mission and Justice, DTMJ, and I will moderate this online launch together with my colleague, Alan.
Hello, everyone. Great to see some familiar names and faces, as well as some new ones. My name is Alan Kalma, and I'm the Global Humanitarian Coordinator for LWF World Service. I think before we start, we'd like to give you some further technical instructions, maybe a first one. I noticed that some of you are messaging and you're just messaging to all panelists. So it'd be good if you can choose all panelists and attendees so everyone sees your message. We'd like to inform you that this event is set up as a webinar. So you will be able to follow the meeting and the speakers, but you won't be able to switch on your camera or unmute yourself, which is why we would like to encourage you to share any comments or questions you may have in the chat box. There will be different check-in points throughout the event where we'll pick up comments and questions from the chat box. So please feel free to use that. In order to get a better overview of who are the participants for this event, we kindly encourage you all, as I mentioned, to either change your name to include your organization, which LWF office or member church you're coming from. And also please do that in the chat box, as I mentioned already. Finally, please be informed that this event is being recorded. However, your names and the chat will not be included in this recording. So I guess this is all from my side. Marina, anything more on the technical aspects?
No, I think we're all set to go. Please feel free to approach us in case you face any challenges with any technical issues. Okay, we are now officially starting the online launch with welcoming remarks by our colleague Eva Christina Nielsen. Eva Christina is the director of the LWF Department for Theology, Mission and Justice, DTMJ. Eva Christina, over to you.
Thank you very much, Marina, and good afternoon to everybody. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this online launch of the guidance note on joint engagement between World Service programs and member churches. This is an outcome of a long process starting even before a specific publication was thought of. And the question has been on the table for a long time, how member churches and World Service programs can engage together. And later on, we saw a need to develop a guidance note. It's part of an interdepartmental process where those of us working mainly with member churches and those of us working with World Service programs have come together. So why is this important? Because it matters who we are as the Lutheran World Federation. It matters with our identity. The LWF is a communion of churches, 148 member churches in 99 countries around the globe. And behind these figures are a lot of people making up these member churches. These churches are the constituency of the LWF. The member churches work in their respective local contexts. They come together in worship and serve the neighborhoods they are in. They serve their communities. And we have been strongly reminded about this in the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, where churches once again have been the first responses in a crisis situation. People turn to churches and faith communities for getting support. And diaconia is part of the core calling of the churches, a call to action, a call to embody God's love to this world, And we are empowered by God's liberating grace. This is why we do this work. The member churches have also mandated the LWF to work with international diaconia, and therefore the LWF is also a large humanitarian and development actor with a long and strong experience and competence in the area of humanitarian and development work. World Service is working in 25 countries, collaborating with local organizations, with international organizations, and with the UN. World Service is working with people in different difficult situations, not least with those who have been forced to leave their homes. World Service is working on empowering people. This work is also a response to the calling the churches have. That was also the foundation when World Service was developed as a diaconal arm of the Lutheran World Federation. It matters who we are. Both member churches and World Service has a long experience when it comes to diaconia. The competence differs, but they need to be linked. There can be challenges, but we want to be professional, all of us. And this professionalism includes humanitarian and development competence. It includes faith literacy. It includes local rootedness. And there are many good examples of good and fruitful collaboration. But we also need to take new steps in order to find synergies and in order to strengthen the work, to be professional in its wider sense, in order to serve the people we want to serve. This is what the guidance note is elaborating on. And it's our firm hope and belief that the guidance note will be very helpful in enhancing the joint engagement between member churches and World Service programs. During this hour together, we will first listen to the opening remarks by the General Secretary, Rev. Dr. Martin Junge. He will be followed by Marina Dölker from the Department for Theology, Mission and Justice, and Alan Kalmar from World Service, who will present the document and lead us through its content. We will then listen to testimonies from the local level on experiences from member churches and World Service programs, collaborating, working together. And before we close, Maria Immonen, the director of the World Department for World Service, will give the concluding remarks. Before handing back to Marina Dölker and Alan Kalmar, I want to express words of appreciation. First of all, to all of you that contributed through interviews, church leaders and leaders of diaconal work institutions in the member churches, World Service colleagues from the country programs, and colleagues in the communion office. This process has been accompanied by Hans Pollack as a consultant, so a big thank you to you as well. I also want to thank the related organizations and partners who provided funding for the LWF Churches and Emergency Program, from where this publication was funded. I would like to particularly mention ACT Church of Sweden, FELM, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the LWF German National Committee, the Canadian Lutheran World Relief, and Finn Church Aid. Thanks to all of you for making this step possible. And last but not least, I want to express my deep appreciation to my colleagues leading this process. Marina Dölker, who is coordinating the Diaconia team in the Department for Theology, Mission and Justice, and Alan Kalmar, the Global Humanitarian Coordinator in World Service. This interdepartmental piece of work is showing good examples and opening up for new and important avenues of collaboration between the LWF member churches and the World Service programs. So a heartfelt thank you to both of you. Again, it matters who we are. That's why the guidance note is important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eva Christina. And from our end as well, a big thank you to all of you who are part of this meeting and who have contributed or have been involved in this process to develop and shape this guidance note. Before we hear more about the content of the document, I'd like to introduce our LWF General Secretary, Rev. Dr. Martin Junge, who is now going to speak more about the importance of collaboration in his opening remarks. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Marina, and thank you for good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is a global meeting, and we are all together marking this important moment where we are going to launch the guidance note. Let me maybe start with a reference to this day. It's a very special day for us in the LWF. This morning, we were in UNHCR signing with the High Commissioner, Filippo Grandi, and other colleagues, a new memorandum of understanding to continue working and even deepening our joint engagement for the sake of the people who require protection, who are moving, internally displaced people, and the host communities supporting them. And now, this afternoon in Geneva, we are launching the guidance note, and this is just a perfect day, particularly because both the event this morning and what we are doing now emphasizes on one big word: cooperation, working together. And this is what needs to happen. In my remarks, I want to offer some reflections, taking us a bit back into history and trying also to locate our process within the life of the LWF, but also the ecumenical journey in which we are. A people without memory is a people without future, we say in Latin America. And that's why it is so good to remember, not to get stuck in memories, but to learn and to build on the journey on which we have been walking. I want to take you back to the year 1947. At that time, Lutheran churches from all over the world came together and decided that they needed to found the Lutheran World Federation. And one of the first actions they took was to found and to create an instrument where they could work together to respond to a huge need at that time in the context of Europe, in the European region, about refugees. At that time, the names and the last names of refugees were European: Latvian, Hungarian, German, Austrian, different names of people seeking protection. I'm always extremely grateful for our foremothers and forefathers who came together to found the Lutheran World Federation, because they had this intuition, this understanding that their coming together would only develop its deepest meaning if it becomes a gift of compassion and justice for those needing it most. The church has a purpose. A communion of churches has a purpose. And it is to embody and to become part of God's transforming work in this world. Because God cares, churches care, as we are invited to become caring communities in this world. And this is why we have a world service. Because Lutheran churches, when they came together, they discerned and understood that their togetherness wants and needs to become a gift to the suffering neighbor. They came together to work together and created that international instrument that would bring them together to serve in ways in which none of them on their own could be serving. This is why there is diaconia in the church. And this is why we have context where we have the two. A church active in diaconia as well, and a world service acting on behalf of the communion in that same context. This is then also the background why, as a Lutheran World Federation, because of the process in which we are, and because of who we are, as Eva Christina emphasized, we needed to come up with something clarifying mandates, ways of working, lines of accountability, and all together, where and how to connect, but then also understanding and accepting where and how we still are different in what we are doing. While it is a very specific Lutheran conversation because of our journey, it is not exclusively Lutheran. It's an ecumenical conversation. And I want to make particular reference to the Malawi consultation organized by the WCC and the ACT Alliance in the year 2014, where precisely these questions were taken up: the understanding of a local presence, of specialized agencies becoming present and sometimes even becoming operational on the ground, and how all of that relates to each other within the ecumenical family, the ecumenical system. So this is the background, the history, and the journey which we have done. This is the ecumenical context within which we are offering this guidance note as a contribution coming from within our life, but I'm convinced not exclusively for use within the Lutheran family. Use it if it is useful. Read it if you want to read it. It is for all of us engaged in these kind of situations. Let me add my own words of gratitude to all the colleagues that have been working and developing this on the ground, churches and World Service colleagues, sharing what it is, where do we bump into each other, and where do we work nicely together, and how do we learn from good practices, and how do we avoid creating difficulties on the ground. This is what the guidance note is all about. Learning from good practices, helping each other to be working together. I want to thank my colleagues in Geneva who have been working hard. I really enjoyed the conversations. When the first drafts came up, it was just great to be talking through all these issues and continuing to learning and clarifying. And I'm convinced this further process of learning, clarifying, spelling out is going to be the reality for all of those using this guidance note. I want to encourage member churches, but also World Service colleagues to use it. Read it, take it up, sit down with your colleagues, with your friends, and go through it. We will learn a lot. Thank you very much. These are my words of introduction, and now I'm curious to just see it presented as all of us are.
Thank you so much, Martin. And yeah, in order to get to know more about how this new LWF publication is going to help us deepen in collaboration, Ellen and I will now give you an overview of the content of the guidance note. Grasa, I kindly ask you to share the presentation for that purpose with all of us. Here it's coming. Yeah, the cover of the guidance note that you can see here is quite special. And Martin mentioned some intense conversations and inspiring discussions, and I think some were taking place around this cover. We feel that the two hands are a nice illustration of the journey of joint engagement and collaboration, a journey that is marked by giving and receiving. So at times during that journey, we may find ourselves at the giving end, at other times at the receiving end. So there's so much that churches can learn from World Service programs, and then so much that World Service programs can learn from churches. And this guidance note is about opening up ourselves for that kind of mutual learning and sharing. So why have we developed this guidance note? Next slide, please, Grave. Following LWF's vision, member churches and World Service programs work together toward a just, peaceful, and reconciled world. Both have a joint calling, but they have distinct mandates. And the nature of their relationship and also the level of their joint engagement depends very much on contextual factors. As LWF Communion Office, we have therefore focused on supporting World Service programs and churches according to the state of their relationship in their specific context over the past years. But while it is important to acknowledge those differences, both member churches and World Service programs have expressed the need for more general guidance on how they can work together. In spite of many contextual differences, there are also commonalities, there are joint patterns when it comes to World Service programs and churches working together. And in this guidance note, we are summarizing these joint patterns in a joint framework that provides orientation, but we hope is still broad enough to be adaptable to the different contextual realities. Next slide, please. The purpose of the guidance note is really to deepen mutual understanding of member churches and World Service programs. It aims to provide inspiration and practical recommendations for meaningful joint engagement. And in a wider sense, as Martin already mentioned, it may also provide orientation for LWF's programs that work with other faith-based communities. And it may be used by other ecumenical agencies working with churches and vice versa. It was already mentioned that the guidance note was developed during a participatory one-year process, even though, of course, our conversations and engagement surrounding that topic reach back much, much longer. But during the past year, we were really able to dig much deeper. We conducted interviews with selected leaders of member churches and World Service programs who shared their experiences and insights. And those really form the basis of this document. Also, LWF staff from different departments provided input and feedback throughout the whole writing process. Thank you to all of you who contributed. And also thank you again to Hans Pollack, who supported us in this process as a consultant, and to our related agencies and partners who provided funding in the context of the Churches and Emergencies program for this. The main target group of the guidance note are staff and volunteers of our member churches and World Service programs who work together on the ground. But this document is also for any LWF staff, not only World Service, and may also be used by partners and organizations working with local faith communities and by churches working with international organizations and NGOs. Next slide, please. But now what's really in the guidance note? The document consists of 5 chapters that you can see here. After laying the foundations for joint engagement in the background chapter 1, the guidance note talks about common ground between member churches and World Service programs and the added value of joint engagement in chapter 2. Chapter 3 describes the differences between both and points to boundaries of the joint collaboration. Chapter 4 aims to inspire and excite readers by pointing to existing models and good practices, including 4 quite exciting case studies. And in chapter 5, finally, we want to point to some very practical top tips that are directly targeted at World Service and church representatives who would like to deepen their relationship. Throughout the whole document, if you read through it, you will find that we have 3 types of different boxes popping up that you can see at the bottom of this slide, illustrated by these different symbols. The green key opportunity boxes, the blue key action boxes, and the orange key challenges. And all these boxes really provide practical recommendation and very concrete follow-up steps that churches and world service programs can take. Next slide, and over to you, Alan.
Thank you, Marina. While you were speaking, I just realized we actually chose the 2 colors which represent the chapters on collaboration. What a coincidence. But let's now dive a bit deeper into each of the chapters. I think the first chapter provides readers with a background and the foundations for our joint engagement. This chapter clarifies that diaconia is both a theological concept and a call to action. So as a concept, it refers to the motivation that guides the practice of service to others, but it also refers to the ways we respond to human suffering and injustice. As already mentioned, the LWF was founded in 1947, basically to heed that biblical calling to become a compassionate and serving presence in the world. Now, the Lutheran churches established and mandated world service as their global instrument in international diaconia, or humanitarian development. Initially, its mandate was to assist Lutherans displaced by the war, but soon realized that humanitarian assistance cannot be restricted to Lutherans only. And in 1952, as Martin mentioned earlier, member churches decided that world service assistance should be impartial. Now, fast forward to current times, and we see deteriorating global conditions have created new challenges for humanitarian and development organizations and for the diaconal work of the churches. Although a global tragedy, COVID-19 was able to highlight and increase awareness of the importance of local partners like churches in humanitarian and development work. Finally, and something we have always known, stronger engagement between member churches and world service programs represents a concrete opportunity for positive change and greater impact. It is important to note that in most cases, world service responds to an emergency upon the request of a member church, and most frequently, that initial response is implemented in close collaboration. As we go into the next slide, we will be looking at the exploring collaboration. This is the second chapter of the guidance note, and it starts with a discussion on what world service and member churches have in common. In summary, as I touched upon in the previous slide, both are distinct expressions of the global communion of Lutheran churches. Member churches make up the constituency of the LWF, while world service is an expression of this communion of churches. We both share the same values based on the same principles of dignity and justice, compassion and commitment, respect for diversity, inclusion and participation, transparency and accountability. We both aim to provide the practical witness of God's love for those marginalized and those who are suffering. We both provide assistance to those in need without discrimination. We both work in overlapping geographical areas. If you look at pages 16 to 17 of the guidance note, it shows a representation of where member churches and world service programs are present, either individually or both. Both are embedded in the same public space, and as such, we are confronted with the same context and challenges. Next slide, please, Grasa. So really, our complementarity is the main justification for engaging jointly. World service programs and member churches each have distinct assets and specific strengths, which, if pulled through collaboration, can be leveraged to effect more positive change for those we seek to assist. The succeeding subsections then showcase the respective key strengths of world service and member churches. The next slide, this one, highlights some of the key strengths of churches as world service partners. This include the fact that churches and faith communities have a sustainable local presence. Long after world service programs have transitioned out or nationalized or localized its response, member churches will still be there. Local faith communities are often the first responders in humanitarian crises and already have in place local human and material resources. Most of you are aware of our earlier publication on the importance of a faith-sensitive humanitarian response. And you should also look into it to refresh your memory, but it's an excellent document to sort of explain this a bit more. Churches offer complementary expertise, including spiritual and psychosocial support, particularly important as World Service engages a lot in community-based psychosocial support. Marina, maybe you can lead us into a discussion on how you think World Service could be a good partner for churches.
Yeah, sure. Next slide, please. So after looking at key strengths of churches as World Service partners, let's look at key strengths of World Service as partners for churches. And probably the most common response we got to this question from church representatives during the interviews was the technical expertise and technical experience of World Service that can enrich and broaden churches' diaconal work. National and global networks to which World Service belongs have also proven to be a good resource to strengthen the advocacy of member churches by connecting their local voices to international dialogues and advocacy efforts. Another strength is the rights-based approach of World Service that is translating Christian values and Christian ethics into humanitarian terminology, and therefore builds a bridge between those two, one would almost say two worlds sometimes. And churches have also appreciated that World Service can provide special know-how about essential quality standards for diaconal work. Finally, the up-to-date proficiency of World Service in those required standard procedures for project implementation can help make diaconal work more efficient. Next slide, please. In Chapter 3 of the guidance note, the boundaries of collaboration are being described. We have heard previously that member churches and World Service, they have a joint calling but distinct mandates. Now, what does that really mean? There is much that they have in common, but also significant differences in how they carry out these mandates and what these mandates are about. And one difference that results from those distinct mandates is the focus of their work. Churches follow a holistic mission approach. That means that diaconia, humanitarian and development work of the church is only part of church's overall missions. Besides theological and pastoral work, including proclamation of the gospel, evangelization, etc. On the other hand, for World Service, the mandate is only focused on international diaconia and advocacy. That is what they do. Another difference there are also slight differences in the lines of accountability of both. Both are, of course, accountable to the communities they serve through their diaconal work, their governing structures, partners, and donors. But in addition, World Service needs to abide by the policies of host governments and comply with very strict regulations of funding partners and back donors. Regulations that are oftentimes stricter than those churches need to adhere to. Another difference is the scope of the people they are serving. World Service focuses on very specific groups like refugees, internally displaced persons, host communities, and so on. Member churches may work with a broader range of people from both within and outside the church. And finally, the working modalities differ significantly. The work of World Service is marked by time-bound project cycles with fixed budgets and clear requirements. And while some churches' diaconal structures also do have that, of course, many member churches' diaconal work still tends to be less time-bound and technical, and is embedded in the broader mission work, which also makes it more long-term. Next slide, please. So how do these differences affect the joint engagement, and what are the key challenges and what are overall ways to overcome them? Well, one recurrent challenge is that churches and World Service tend to use very different terminologies to describe their work, and they have different working modalities based on the respective external requirements that they have. This can make it difficult to find a shared language. And the only way forward is to invest time and effort to better understand each other. And that does not happen overnight. Another key challenge are distorted perceptions on both sides. Some churches find it difficult to understand, for instance, why World Service cannot engage in the church broader mission work, and World Service staff sometimes assume that churches want to evangelize while carrying out diaconal work. Engaging in open dialogue about each other's mandates and resulting working approaches and modalities is key to overcome such distorted perceptions. A third challenge that we have heard a lot is that many churches feel that the Christian identity of World Service is not very visible. And some World Service staff may have limited knowledge about the identity and work of the member churches and the faith identity of the LWF. It is therefore essential to support World Service staff in gaining an understanding of the Christian values and Lutheran identity. Then the level of capacity to implement diaconal projects can vary significantly. While some churches have well-institutionalized diaconal structures, others may face capacity challenges. And this can pose reputational and financial risks to World Service if compliance with back donor requirements cannot be ensured. It is therefore very important for both partners to clearly define the requirements of any joint project beforehand, and to also make an honest prior assessment of the existing capacities on both ends. Finally, the last challenge mentioned here, and of course this is not an exclusive list, there may be more, but one final major challenge we want to highlight is the limited personal and material capacities on both sides to engage and to deepen the joint collaboration. In a world of fast project cycles and earmarked funding, there is often no time and money to really engage jointly. And this we have heard from all ends, from both World Service and church representatives. But what we have seen as good practice, also from the case studies in the guidance note, is dedicated funding for joint projects, and joint projects as an opportunity to deepen mutual understanding. Yeah, chapter 4 of the guidance note now describes some of the good practices and possible forms of collaboration. So next slide, and over to you, Alan.
Thanks, Marina. I think, as we also mentioned already, collaboration already exists in varying degrees at the local level. And some of those good practices, I think we've highlighted here. The first one, and I think this is quite the basic one, cordial relationships. This includes mutual invitations to visit or take part in informal and formal events. Another key example is joint participation in and mutual support through national and supranational networks. I think this is particularly, of course, in cases where we're both present. Joint projects as opportunities for mutual learnings. I think one of the things that we also realized beyond the concept, what's more effective is to actually engage in joint projects to effectively learn from each other as member churches and as World Service programs. Working together through staff exchanges and secondments. We'll hear some of those good examples, I think, later on related to this one. Capacity strengthening through training sessions. And this could go both ways. It doesn't always have to be World Service strengthening capacity of the member churches, because there's a lot that World Service can also learn from our member churches, particularly their understanding of the local context. In some cases, we have a joint memorandum of understanding, which outlines joint values and principles, roles and responsibilities. And in other cases, we also have a joint advisory group for regular information sharing and discussion. So what next? We've come up to the first 4 chapters, and it's really looking at all these different forms of collaboration and, what are our specific mandates. There's chapter 5, of course, which identifies certain top tips. But how do we move forward from here? So after this official launch, we hope to print some copies of the guidance note for distribution, although we have been circulating the digital versions and we will continue to do so. You can also find this resource on our website. In the next few months, we hope to conduct regional workshops to offer space for further discussions and reflections, and we highly encourage you to participate in the regional workshops. This particular event is is excellent because we have translations, but we also want to conduct the meetings in the regional languages. So please participate in those. We are hoping and we are encouraging everyone to be more intentional in identifying progress in our engagements and also in collecting good examples to share. I think Michael Hayden of ICVA has raised a very important question. How do we track the progress that we have in this particular engagement, and how do we make sure that we are moving towards that vision of where we want this interaction to be? At the moment, we still don't have specific responses to that. I think there are efforts to track this, as you can see from the guidance note and the case stories. But as I mentioned, I think we need to be a bit more intentional as we move forward. Finally, and as a practical step, we do encourage the use of this guidance note during the induction of new World Service staff when they come in, or the newly elected church leaders when they come to Geneva for the Ronel, for example. So basically, this concludes the quick run-through of the guidance notes. If there are any, I don't know, Marina, have you checked if there are any questions or comments in the chat box that we can look into, or do we proceed further?
There are indeed a couple of questions and comments. So some participants, they point to the importance of this document and referring to other useful resources that are linked, like the International Handbook on Ecumenical Diaconia or the Faith-Sensitive Approach in Humanitarian Response Guidance on Mental Health. We also have a question here about how World Service World Service is going to baseline and measure the partnerships with member churches to monitor progress, and where we want the partnerships in Diaconia to be in 3, 4, or 5 years from now. This is quite a tricky question. And it's from Michael Hayden, and he also asked whether these guidance notes help develop contextualized plans for transformational collaboration.
Exactly, Verena. And as I was saying earlier, this is something that, of course, the consultant has conducted an excellent job in really having all of these discussions with World Service programs and member churches globally. So we sort of have this baseline already on what is existing at the country program. And the call is at the moment to be more intentional in terms of tracking this particular progress.
Then if I may, Alan, there's another question from Christian Albecker, who says that there are 6 countries where World Service is present, 6 countries on the map in the guidance note, in the middle of the guidance note, but where there's no LWF member church. And he says in these countries, there are other Christian and Protestant churches, for instance, in Haiti, in Chad, or Syria. What about the relations between World Service and these churches?
Yes.
Yeah, Alan, if I may just say a few words about that question.
Sure.
I think this guidance note is also for helping World Service strengthening collaboration and relations with other non-LWF member churches. And actually part of the development process of this guidance note was also interviews with some of the World Service representatives from countries where there is no member church, but there are other churches that the World Service program has been working with. So it's definitely not limited to contexts where there are member churches present.
And I think what happens, for example, in Syria, some of our key partners, actually our key partners at the moment in Syria are churches. So we work with the Caritas Syria, for example, and then of course we're working with the EPDC, which is the Orthodox Church. So I think this particular study is just looking at those places where there is an actual presence for both. But as we mentioned, this is something that we can look at in terms of those areas where World Service is still currently not present, because in a way it gives sort of like an entry point for further discussions with World Service and the member churches in those countries.
Yeah. And then we have just another comment from Rabin, our World Service country representative in Iraq, who says that member churches also need to abide by the policies of the host government when it receives funds from the LWF country program. And this is why improving accountability relationships are very important.
Yeah.
Yeah, some other comments here, but I'm afraid we won't have time to go into all of those.
I was about to say, Marina, like we will, of course, respond to some of the questions. If there are any more later on, we can send you an email afterwards. But I think, Marina, for now, it would be good to actually see some of those practical examples at the ground level.
Yeah, definitely. So, Grasa, if you could stop sharing, then...
Yeah, so as mentioned, the fact that we are only publishing the guidance note now does not mean that this engagement is not happening. It is with great pleasure that we show you a couple of short videos which showcase some of this existing good collaboration. In this first one, we will hear from Bishop President Atahualpa Hernandez of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Colombia and Adriana Franco Chitanana, LWF World Service Colombia Country Representative. Grasa?
I'm going to share it.
Hola, muy buenos días, muy buenas tardes. Yo soy Adriana Franco Chitanana, soy la representante de país de la Federación Luterana Mundial en Colombia. Mucho gusto.
Me alegra saludarles, soy Atahualpa Hernández, obispo presidente de la Iglesia Evangélica Luterana de Colombia.
El Servicio Mundial llegó a Colombia en 2002 y fue por invitación directa de la IELCO y estuvimos trabajando muy de la mano en la misma oficina los primeros 4 años en el país. Y pues el trabajo conjunto ha sido en diferentes formas, en diferentes temas, incluyendo pues respuesta humanitaria de calidad, sistemas de desarrollo de proyectos y también pues temáticas como desarrollo y paz.
Cuando la Iglesia hizo la invitación a la Federación Luterana Mundial para que el Servicio Mundial acompañara la respuesta humanitaria y de desarrollo, nos vimos abocados a trabajar en conjunto y a desarrollar ese compromiso y ese trabajo en respuesta de nuestra fe de una manera que cada día ha podido mejorar. Creo que podemos destacar como iglesia que el trabajo en respuesta a los desafíos, a las situaciones que vive nuestro país, se ha visto beneficiado por tener la presencia del Servicio Mundial. Y podemos destacar el trabajo humanitario, el trabajo de desarrollo y especialmente el trabajo que en el contexto de la negociación para los acuerdos de paz en nuestro país tuvo y la visibilización de los aportes que el sector religioso y pues en particular la Iglesia Evangélica Luterana de Colombia pudo realizar a esta construcción de paz y transformación del país. Más recientemente, el acompañamiento a la población migrante ha sido también un trabajo en el que hemos podido en conjunto responder, unir esfuerzos y articular nuestra respuesta con miras a que el testimonio de fe y específicamente el testimonio como familia luterana sea dada en nuestro país.
A mí me parece que el trabajo conjunto de Servicio Mundial y la Iglesia miembro IELCO aquí en Colombia es muy interesante. O sea, hay unas sinergias muy bonitas que se pueden sacar de esta relación, de este entendimiento entre hermanas y hermanos luteranos. Para mí, por ejemplo, puedo decir que el trabajo de incidencia no sería tan bueno si no tendríamos esta relación en del uno y el otro, porque de las dos agencias, digamos, de las dos partes de la federación, podemos observar diferentes oportunidades, podemos también avisar el uno al otro, mira, hemos escuchado esto, vemos esto como una puerta de oportunidad, ¿por qué no nos concentramos para hacer algo en conjunto, teniendo que ver con este contexto o esta situación? Y esa sinergia me parece muy bonita y me alegra mucho que podemos aprovechar de ella aquí en Colombia.
Siendo una iglesia que tiene presencia en un país donde la expresión de fe luterana es minoritaria, la presencia y el trabajo de Servicio Mundial ha significado un aporte valiosísimo en nuestros esfuerzos por responder a las situaciones humanitarias, de desarrollo, de transformación de nuestra sociedad. El poder articular nuestro trabajo y el poder presentarnos ante la sociedad como una sola familia luterana que, fruto de su fe, expresa mediante la acción diaconal un trabajo en respuesta a las necesidades, ha sido enriquecido y ha sido mucho más visible y ha tenido un impacto mucho mayor que si el trabajo se estuviera haciendo solo con una de las partes. En ese sentido, el trabajo mancomunado, el trabajo en conjunto, ha sido un aporte no solo para nuestra propia experiencia, nuestro aprendizaje interno, sino también para la expresión y para el testimonio que se da hacia afuera de cara a las necesidades y a las realidades y desafíos de nuestra sociedad.
Thank you. That was really nice. From Latin America, let's go to Asia and hear about the excellent collaboration happening in Nepal. We will be hearing from the president of the Nepal Evangelical Lutheran Church and the Lutheran Community Welfare Society Nepal, Reverend Joseph Soren, and the country director of LWF World Service in Nepal, Dr. Bijaya Bajracharya, on what this engagement means in a multi-religious, multilingual, and multicultural context such as Nepal.
Namaste, this is me, Reverend Joseph Soren, President of Nepal Evangelical Lutheran Church and Lutheran Community Welfare Society, Nepal. NELC was founded in 1943, has been promoting the church ministry by God's grace. LCWS was established in 2010 as the diaconal arms of NELC with the aim of fulfilling the biblical command to love your neighbors as yourself. Through LCWS, its collaboration with LWF Nepal for the socio-economic development of the poor and marginalized community. Various projects are being implemented in Province 1 of Nepal. Through the humanitarian projects, LCWS has been taking initiatives for the livelihood of the target groups through various activities, disaster risk reduction and emergency response and social protection and cohesion. LCWS is committed to the sustainable livelihood of the target groups, capacity enhancement of community during disaster and emergencies, and the realization of the rights of marginalized communities. Just as LWF Nepal does purely humanitarian work, so too NLC has been doing purely humanitarian work through LCWS. As Nepal is a multi-religious, multilingual and multicultural country, partnership with the government of Nepal and other stakeholders are essentials to address the problems of marginalized communities of all communities, for which LWF Nepal and NELC are working together. What we believe is it's very important for religious organizations to be active, united and ready for effective emergency response in times of disaster. So LWF Nepal, NLC and LCWS have been jointly organizing ecumenical and interfaith meeting which will unite all religious communities during emergencies. In addition, we are conducting capacity building programs for local governments, interfaith organizations and church members of NLC for emergency response and joint action. Thank you.
Namaste, myself Bijaya Bajracharya, a country director of LWF Nepal. LWF has been working in Nepal for more than 35 years. Today I would like to tell you about joint work of LWF Nepal and its local implementing partner LCWS, why our joint engagement matters and what are our way forward actions for stronger collaboration. LWF Nepal has been working with LCWS, a diaconal wing of the church, on various development and advocacy projects in the eastern part of Nepal since 2010. Our joint work focuses on people with disabilities, advocacy for the inclusion of marginalized groups, capacity strengthening of local governments, and on livelihoods development. From 2019, through the project on churches and emergencies, our work on emergency preparedness and response activities became more prominent. LWF Nepal has been providing various capacity building training and other organizational strengthening support to the NELC and LCWS. I am proud to tell you that with this support, LCWS has increased its networking capacity, including with private sectors, for raising funds needed for emergency responses. Besides, it could enhance its profile by developing various organizational policies and good quality knowledge products. Our joint engagement matters a lot because we both aim for dignified living of the marginalized groups through their human rights and livelihoods development. For achieving this aim, we complement each other by bringing different expertise and perspectives. LCWS brings insider perspectives of right holders and community, whereas LWF Nepal provides professional and technical know-how. Of course, we both apply interfaith and multi-religious perspectives in our work because the Constitution mentions Nepal as a multi-religious and multicultural nation. While doing so, it seems that we have different approaches. LCWS focuses on its Christian basis and Lutheran faith identity, whereas LWF Nepal focuses on its reputation and role as a humanitarian organization. Going forward, we both will explore more deeply how to deal with different staff with different religious affiliations. This also means that for LWF Nepal, we have to be more aware of church-related terms and functions. Similarly, we both will further strengthen our collaboration by being more flexible in deepening our mutual understanding and adapting our joint learning for the humanitarian and development goals. Thank you.
Thank you once again to our friends and colleagues in Nepal and Colombia for working on this video and sharing these videos with us and really giving us a glimpse of what this means on the ground, this engagement. And with this, may I now ask the Director for World Service, Ms. Maria Imonen, to share with us her concluding remarks and to wrap our event up for all of us. Maria?
Thank you, and hello to everyone participating in this event with us. My task is really just to highlight a few comments that I've heard throughout this event. These guidance notes are a call to action. They're a call to action for our member churches, and they're a call to action for all of our World Service country programs and emergency operations to find ways to work together. We've been doing it for a long time, but these notes will help us to prioritize cooperation and working together. It gives practical solutions, practical tips, practical questions are raised, recognizing that we have different mandates, but we have the same purpose, which is to help people in need according to our faith calling. We are able to find key opportunities, some actions, but we're also honest about the challenges. It's not dangerous to talk about challenges. Only by addressing the challenges and the difficulties we see will we be able to find our way forward in a good way. We are also quite proud to have come up with this guidance note. It's been mentioned by some people that this is an LWF contribution to the localization debate, where we're able to talk about humanitarian action and supporting local partners, and in LWF, local member churches are the LWF. So we are already localized. It's a question of how do we work together with our different mandates and really achieve change in the world for those who desperately need it. Moving forward, we'd like to encourage all of you who are participating in this event to join in the rollout. Use the guidance notes. It doesn't matter which constituency you're from, they can be applied. Like Christian Albecker was asking about, is this a Lutheran thing? No, these questions are common to all church communities. Indeed, they're very common to working with any faith community. How do we practically find the mechanisms to work together in the field? So use the guidance notes, send us feedback, participate in some of the regional events. Feel free to share them with anybody who might be interested. And with those words, I'd like to close this event by thanking all of you who have participated, all the member church representatives who have been online, the LWF governance members, related organizations, and colleagues both in the field and in Geneva. Thank you very much for having participated, and we look forward to excellent collaboration between all of us. Thank you very much.